there were no heroes over there. Some people just had an opportunity to do things that anyone would have done. Uh, I would have risked my life with every guy I served with over there, and I think they felt the same way. Some people had an opportunity to do things when others didn't, but that we always did it. We took care of the other guy. So I don't think there were really any heroes. I, I think gentleman just recently got the Medal of Honor for doing about the same thing I did, but it was there was nothing heroic about it. We had a job to do and we did it. I made the first pickup of crew members who were shot down with a Cobra, and of course they had no place to sit but on the ammo doors. And when they got shot down, and I saw they were okay, I had no alternative but to go in and pick them up. And we did. Got shot up a little bit doing it. The helicopter did, but they climbed on the ammo doors. I was able to fly them out. The CG, or center of gravity, on the helicopter was way out of whack when two guys were sitting up front. But after my second time of doing that, they actually put seat belts in the ammo compartment so the guys could belt themselves onto the doors to keep from falling. They didn't have anything to hold on to when they were out there. So wow. It was a real slow and low flight, but we could always get them to a safe area. And it happened numerous times in Vietnam. And like I say, it's just something you did.
So you're out there in what's called the hunter-killer team. You've got the Loach, which is a very small helo, and these guys are often operating very close to the ground, if I understand it correctly.
Right.
The Cobra's providing security and fire support. And so is it that the guys in the Loach got shot down, and then you needed to come in and pick them up?
Right.
How many times did that happen?
I actually did it twice. I've heard of several other instances of it happening in other units and everything. It happened a couple of times after I left country in my unit with other pilots I knew. So it got to be fairly common. That was the only way you had to get them out of there. When we first came in country, our unit was at Tay Ninh. Up in 3 Corps, we moved to Da Tiang, and then we moved to down in the Delta in 4 Corps. We moved to Dongtan. So our units actually moved. Our unit did where the action was. They moved us around quite a bit. And while these were our headquarters, our missions might be flown out of Mukwa up in the Plain of Reeds, or other small bases around. We'd fly all day out of there, go back home at night. So it just depended. We had a place to sleep at night, and that's as close as we could call it home.
So you started in 3 Corps, but most of your tour is down in 4 Corps?
Right.
A lot of vets I've spoken with, referred to rules of engagement where they felt like their hands were tied. And I just heard this recently, a soldier who's near the border of Laos and Cambodia, and he says they can see, lights from trucks driven by the NBAA, but they couldn't do anything about it because they were over in either Cambodia or Laos. And, they felt like their hands were tied. I've talked to other vets who served down in the Delta. And what I've heard, I wouldn't say from all the guys I've talked to who served in the Delta, but from some of the guys who served in the Delta, that down there, it was almost kind of a Wild West kind of thing, where your hands weren't as tied as much, and you kind of had more freedom of movement. And this has come from a Navy guy who worked with Special Forces, so that kind of makes some sense, but also with a guy who served on the Loaches. He just said it was just kind of a Wild West environment down there. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, we had designated free fire zones, and the South Vietnamese knew that they could not even go into these zones, and if people were in those zones, they were BC or NBAA, and they were called free fire zones. That was when we were first there. It graduated. Let me preface this a bit by saying politicians fought this war. We didn't. We could have paved the country and made a parking lot out of it in a week if they turned the army loose. But you've got to understand, Washington politicians who never picked up a rifle in their life fought this war, and they were doing it with a bunch of kids. They were the best in America, in my opinion. So occasionally, for some reason, they would come up and say, if you get shot at, you have to leave the area and call for a clearance and come back to fire if we give you the clearance. And they may say, no, you can't fire there. The way we operate as a hunter-killer team, it was very, very obvious when the Loach saw people, he could tell if they were BC or South Vietnamese civilians. And to my knowledge, we never actually fired on any civilians or anybody, even though it would be a free fire zone that they might have wandered into. But if they were carrying AK-47s and ammo and things, we knew who they were. So it worked itself out. Now this bit about not being able to fire until you got a clearance didn't always work that way. If we saw them, we fired on. If they were shooting at us, we did return fire. It was ridiculous. They say even if you're fired on, you can't shoot. But we didn't do that too often.
Did that happen, these, what you're describing here, where, you know, before you fire, you need to get clearance? Did that happen more toward the end of your tour?
Right. It was right at the end of the tour. I didn't have to deal with that too much. But I think the guys who were there later in latter part of 69 and 70, they dealt with it quite a bit.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if that is partly related to the beginning of the Vietnamization process. I don't know if there's any connection or not between that rule and the beginning of the Vietnamization process. Kind of this long process of really withdrawing from Vietnam.
Yeah, I think you're probably correct in that. But I don't know, in 68 and the first part of 69, it was pretty much all out war going on. That's when we had committed most of the troops. Ted of 68, the North Vietnamese Army and South Vietnamese Viet Cong were well equipped, and they really put up a fight. So we had it pretty good then. We didn't only fly in our unit hunter killer. The Cobras flew at night. We would go up around Saigon or some of the larger cities and fly all night long from rocket standby. We could see where rockets or mortars were fired from, and we'd fly all night. Part of my tour, I spent just night flying. I volunteered to take the night missions. I always felt I had an advantage when I could see them shooting at me, and you could see the muzzle flashes and tracers better at night.
You knew they were? Wow. The Loach guys I've talked to, you know, they talk about sometimes getting just a foot or two off the ground, and sometimes being almost face to face with somebody and determining, is this VC, is this, you know, just a South Vietnamese farmer? Of course, it's a lot of times it's not possible to know who's who, but I mean, is that right, that these guys are often just right hovering right over the ground, just, you know, doing?
Oh yeah, they're at treetop level. actually look inside bunker doors. Sometimes get right down on the bunkers and look in, and they the observer on our loach usually carried a red smoke grenade with a pin pull in one hand. He had a car 15 in the other hand, and as soon as they got fired at, they were usually flying hot, which meant their minigun was hot. The pilot fired the minigun, they dropped the red smoke and got out of the way, because by the time that red smoke came up, I was putting rockets underneath them. I was hitting them with 2.75 rockets under them. So they got out of the way pretty quick, but they did their share of getting shot and shot down, believe me.
Wow.
It's a pretty dangerous mission.
Yeah. So the Loaches, one of their basic missions then is to find targets, and then one of the basic missions of the Cobras then is to hit the targets.
Right. We were basically about 12 to 1,500 feet, and we never lost sight of that loach. And it was we had an area of operation that we were assigned each time, and it was our based on intelligence they received, and it was our duty to keep that loach within that area of operation. And usually in the Delta, it was a free fire zone that we had, and they just got down and hovered and looked for the bad guys. And they were going pretty slow until they got shot at, and then they were going pretty fast.
Yeah.
But I don't know. They made an easy target.
Wow.
And the Cobras, when we first got them in country, we didn't get shot at very often with them. They realized that, you know, we had a lot of firepower on board, so they hesitated before they shot at us most times, unless they felt like, you know, they could take us out. And we had quite a few that did get shot down, but I don't know. They were pretty durable aircraft. I've seen them take a lot of hits.
Were any of your helos ever shot down?
I was never shot down. I was shot while flying, but we never lost power of the aircraft. And I've taken lots of hits, but none of them actually took the aircraft out. We had a lot of redundancy built into the aircraft. For it to actually be shot down, they would probably have to take a hit right in the compressor, and they had armor plating around the compressor part of the engine. So it was pretty good flying. We made a small target too, and we're usually flying pretty fast.
This is a question that I think it's probably impossible to, you know, explain to someone who's never experienced it, but you know, to the extent that words can get us anywhere, I'm always interested in the mindset of a young man. How old were you when you were there?
Well, I couldn't buy a beer in San Francisco when I went over.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was, you know, I turned 21. My first tour when I got there was 20.
Wow.
And a lot of the guys were younger than me.
And you're a warrant officer, is that right?
Right. Before my second tour in Vietnam, I took a direct commission. I was a captain when I went back the second tour, but the first tour I was a warrant.
So the question is, you know, you're 20 years old, you're flying a very complicated machine, and people are shooting at you. So you've got two stressful things going on simultaneously. One, you're flying a real complicated machine in a dangerous environment. Secondly, people are trying to kill you simultaneously. And the question that always comes to my mind is, you know, what is the mindset of a 20-year-old, you know, who's doing this? I mean, like, I guess I'm just asking about the psychology of it. You know, how does this work psychologically, that you're flying this complicated machine while you're being fired at, and you keep doing what you're supposed to be doing?
I don't know. I think the Army did a really good job of training us because it never crossed my mind. We were too busy to be scared most of the time. You've got three radios that are going wide open when there's a lot of, you're in a firefight, everybody's talking, uh, and you're trying to monitor all that, and you really are paying more attention to your wingman or to the load than you are to what's going on in your aircraft. I think most of the time we were already back and safe and on the ground and in our hooch before we started thinking about what really happened that day. Mm. And I think as a defense mechanism, you put it all behind you. We coped with it a lot by joking, playing tricks on each other, and just being almost kids, young men, like college kids. Mm. And I don't know, you just learn to cope with it.
When did you go into the Army?
Well, believe it or not, I was in college. The Navy aviation recruiters showed up one day, and I stopped and talked to them, and they took me flying, and we did some loops and rolls. And I was always fascinated with flying. Wow. And I said, that's what I want to do. And it just happened that my football coach was a helicopter pilot in the Army Guard. And we were discussing flying one day, and he said, well, you ought to get in the Army. I said, I didn't even know they had aircraft. And I went and talked with them, and I went ahead and signed up right away. I had pretty strong feelings about what we were doing in Vietnam, and it was the right thing to do. And I just wanted to be a part of it. I didn't want it to get away from me. And I was pretty bored with college, to be honest with you. It gotten bored. So yeah. Talked to my old coach, and then I signed up. The next thing I knew, I was at Fort Polk in basic training.
So it sounds like it was a combination of really wanting to fly, and the military can help you get there, but also a sense that this mission in Vietnam was important, and you wanted to be part of that. And so, here's how you can bring these two things together, learning to fly and, and playing your part in this mission in Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely correct. That's exactly how I felt.
You arrived in Vietnam in '68?
Yeah, I did in May of '68. I don't remember much about the flight at all. It was just crowded and a bunch of guys, and we were all pretty quiet. Not much joking around or talking going on. Everybody they were deep in thought.
Apprehension or just wondering what's coming?
Well, yeah, apprehension and going into the unknown. Even though they trained us well, we didn't really know exactly what was there waiting for. There are two times in my life when I really thought I'd made a mistake in the military, and that's getting off the bus at Fort Polk, Louisiana, with the drill sergeant. I said, why did I do this? Yeah. And then it was okay. And then getting off the plane in Vietnam and stepping off into that heat, I said, what have I done? As we processed out and went to our unit, as soon as I got to the unit, I was so glad to be assigned to an air cav unit. I said, this is what I've heard about all through flight school. You want to fly for a cav unit. And I met the guys there, and I mean, it was a great bunch of guys. So I was at home right away. I really enjoyed it. We didn't have much in the way of facilities or anything. Where we had to build our own hooches to live in, and we could go scrounge lumber and plywood and stuff and tin, and built us a little comfortable place to live. But at least we weren't in tents,
Yeah. Now, as a Cobra pilot, you know that you're going into combat. I don't think there's any ambiguity about that, right?
Mhm.
You know this is where you're going. Um, so far as you can remember, what was your thinking about that? Was it something that you were sort of looking forward to, seeing what it's like, apprehensive about, combination of both?
I don't recall ever being apprehensive about it too much because I knew exactly what I'd gotten into. Uh, at Fort Rucker, went through the gunship training, and then when I went to uh, Hunter Army Airfield to Cobra transition, uh, they pretty well prepared you for what you would be doing. Uh, and the fact that I had all this firepower at my fingertips made me feel pretty safe, really. Uh,
Yeah.
I, I'm not saying there, if anybody tells you they were never scared in Vietnam, they were probably a company clerk or something. If they were in combat, there were times when the odds are against you, it doesn't look good. And then I don't ever remember having the apprehensive feeling, but I remember being scared over things I couldn't control, like 122 millimeter rockets coming in off New Ba Dinh when we were taking in one after another, and you could hear them. And you says, this one got my name. We didn't have any bunkers to go to. We were on the flight line. And you just lie on the ground and say, please don't let this one hit me. Uh,
Wow.
and that's when you become a bit apprehensive. I won't say you're scared. You don't have control over it. As long as we had control over what we were doing and flying, it never bothered me.
How would you describe your relationship, and this is again more of a psychological question, your relationship with those guys on the ground? Those guys who are setting ambushes, getting ambushed, just dealing with everything that comes with being out in the bush. Um, you know, in your mind, what was your relationship with those guys?
One thing I really remember is I had a night mission one night at Dao Tian, and I flew into their little landing strip and walked to the club. It was still open to see if they had anything to eat, and there was a captain there, and he came up and asked me who I flew with, and he said, "Do you know Stogie 34?" I said, "I am Stogie 34." And he hugged me, and he said, "You saved my life." So I think that was our relationship with those guys. Uh, when they needed us, we were there. We did whatever we could to help. We were there, and they thought nothing about calling us in 20 or 30 meters from where they were. They would pop a smoke and say the bad guys are only 20 meters away. And when they felt good enough that we could shoot rockets that close to them, uh, but they'd be pinned down. So they really liked us, and we did whatever we could to take care of them. Those guys had a hard time in those rice paddies and sloshing around the jungles. So they needed all the help they could get.
May of 68, you arrive. How long was it before you experienced, heard, or saw that first thing that drove home to you what you already knew? You know you're going into a war zone, but you see here, experience something that really drives that home for the first time.
Well, I didn't know the extent of what we would be doing. Uh, Actually, I guess the first thing that really drove it home is we had a signal outpost on the top of New Ba Dinh. It got overrun one night. All the Americans got killed. We were flying helicopters all night up there trying to do what we could to protect them. And the next day, they brought the bodies down in Chinooks, and we saw them unload the bodies. And it really hit home. I can remember flying into a fire support base down in the Delta one morning for a first light mission, first light briefing for the mission they wanted to do that day. First thing in the morning, and they'd been under attack all night, and they just bodies of these 18 and 19-year-old kids piled up there. And I had to walk across them and through them to go to the Tactical Operations Center. And I said, these are the best people we've got in the country, and they're dying. And it really hit home then. The guys were going to Canada, who were going to be the ones who voted for our next president and came home to wives, and they're teaching our kids or whatever. And the good guys are getting killed. So it hit home to me then when I saw that. And then you just have to harden yourself to it and keep going. The latter part of my tour, which was April and May of '69, when we were getting these if you're shot at, you can't shoot back orders and things like that. I said, why don't they just let us win the war? We lost some 56,000 men in the war, and by their own account, the North Vietnamese lost over 600,000. That sounds like we were winning the war, of the actual war. But we were never going to change the hearts of these people and the way they thought, no matter what the body count was or what you did. I think the public perception of the war forced the politicians to back down. I think that's what they were doing. They started looking for a way out. We're not going to escalate this anymore. We're going to start withdrawing troops, and that's what they did in '70 and '71. They started getting fewer and fewer troops over there. So they didn't want to keep escalating this thing because they felt we'd never change the will of the people. We could have easily won the war if we wanted to, but I think they were looking for a way out.
Yeah.
We got an attack at Tay Ninh one night, and they got inside the wire. No Americans were killed. The sappers who came in all were killed. My mother sent me a newspaper clipping, an AP clipping from the local paper here about the base being overrun and slaughtering of the Americans. We didn't lose anybody. Nobody even got wounded. They just, there's no better word to say than they just lied about it. They were trying to change the public's perception of the war and what was going on. They tried to make it look like we were losing. And it just wasn't true. And it scared her to death because she knew where I was. I had to write real quick and say, that's just not so.
Now, you said you went back for a second tour, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I was a Cobra, and I came back here as a Cobra instructor pilot at Cobra Hall, Hunter Army Airfield, and instructed there for a while. And I got a direct commission while I was there. Had a chance to get an artillery battery at Fort Stewart, Georgia. So artillery officer, and I went down and did that. And then I called Branch one day and said, look, I'd like to go to fixed wing qualification course. Sure. When you want to start? I said, whenever, next class. So I ended up going to fixed wing Q course, but they didn't tell me they were attaching orders back to Vietnam on that. So I got to go back for a second tour. Totally different, 71.
Well, yeah, I'll ask you about that. So when you go back in '71, you're flying fixed wing then?
No, well, that's what I did fly, but I only flew enough to stay current in it. I was S2 and S3 of an old Air Force installation at Tuiwa, up in Tuco. So I had a desk job, a second tour. I had a choice of going to as a Cobra instructor pilot to the Cobra team in Phong Tao, or taking this desk job. And I said, well, I've taken my chances flying long enough, let me do something else for a while. So that's what I did.
So this desk job then, 71, what did the war, now of course the war is going to look very different. I mean, from the perspective of a Cobra pilot and then the perspective of a desk job, and then the difference between 4-corps and 2-corps. So I'm assuming, a lot of things are very different. But, overall, how did the war feel different in 71 than it did back in 68, 69?
Well, the main thing, I never heard a shot fired in 71.
Hmm.
It was an old Air Force installation, and it was in a place where I could drive to town and have lunch with my Vietnamese counterpart. That's how much things changed. I had a vehicle that was assigned to me, and I could just leave the post and drive into town and go have lunch with them and drive back. So it had changed a lot. It had really wound down as far as the fighting everywhere. And it was becoming even more and more political, I think, and we were restricted in what we could do. Like I said, when I was there in '68, we moved wherever the trouble was, wherever the hot spots were. B Troop, there, the 17th Cal was there. We moved to it. And we flew a lot. I've had one day there where I flew 19 hours in one 24-hour period, fired over 1,000 rockets in that period because we were in such heavy contact. I didn't hear things like that in 71. Now, I'm not saying they didn't, but where I was, things were totally different.
And you said, having lunch with your Vietnamese counterpart then, so did you have a fair amount of interaction with South Vietnamese on this second tour?
Yes, I really did. I was the last American on this base at Tui when we turned it over to the Vietnamese. I saw lots of things that the average soldier wouldn't see because I got to see how much these Quonset huts and trailers and buildings cost, how much the American taxpayer actually paid for, which was probably 10 times their value to get them over there. There were a lot of politicians making money off the war. Anyway, I did work with them very closely. I got to be very good friends with my counterpart. He went to college here in the States, was educated here, and he was a good guy. We exchanged Christmas cards for years, and then after the North Vietnamese took over, I never heard from him yet. So I wonder what happened there, and always will.
Sure. So you saw Vietnamization. I mean, you say you're the last American on this base handing the keys over
Yeah.
to the South Vietnamese. You saw that.
Yeah.
Did you feel confident just based on your own experience? Did you feel confident that the South Vietnamese would be able to defend their own country and hold it together?
Not at all. When I would sign a building over, one building at a time on this entire installation, and every light fixture had to be in, every light had to be working, and the building in perfect condition. I would sign it over to them. They were coming along right behind me, tearing it down and selling the electrical parts and the lumber and everything on the black market. No, I didn't have any confidence that they would continue without us there.
Wow. Going back then to your first tour, and I know that, combat from, the perspective of a Cobra is going to be very different from a guy on the ground, um, who's dealing with NVA or VC on the ground. But what was your perception of the enemy? I mean, in your first tour when you're dealing with them from the air, um, if the South Vietnamese did not, at least the ones you work with, did not, instill a lot of confidence in you, what was your perception of the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong that you dealt with in 3 Corps and 4 Corps?
I have quite a bit of admiration for these guys. They were good. Uh, they lived in a tough environment. They worked in a tough environment. Uh, we did a lot of these kind of experimental flying down the Delta at night, and we would go out with a slick with guys with starlight scopes, and they would spot sampans or movement on the ground, and they would fire them, and we would roll in with our rockets. A lot of times we'd get secondary explosions, stuff, and they were moving things up and down canals and river at night, and move. We experimented a bit with flechette warheads on the 2.75. Little flechettes look like little nails with fins on them. So we used those some at night, but they wanted us to go in and insert our infantry the next day to count the bodies and see how effective the flechettes actually were as a weapon. And I remember one night the VC and about 15 South Vietnamese regular Army soldiers were marching together. The South Vietnamese guys were carrying their in uniform with their M16s. The VC were carrying their AK-47s, and and they were both fighting against. It was the government was corrupt enough that they knew what we were going to do before we did it in most cases. When we planned the mission, it leaked out somehow and got to them. So they had quite a few sympathizers in the South Vietnamese Army, which made things more difficult for us. I admire them as soldiers, though. To answer your question, they were really good and they were tough.
And would you say that that's especially true of the NBAA? Sometimes vets say, the VC were good in their own way, but the NBAA were really they were the serious ones.
They were, and they marched so long. I've got some letters from NBAA that we killed, and they were almost giddy to be doing what they were doing. They had marched all the way from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, and they still seemed happy. I don't understand that. I don't know why, but they were tough. They were good. I can't say my contact was probably 20-1 with the VC and one of the NBAA. We didn't see them that far south too often. If they did, they came down through Cambodia. And 68, I was on a mission one morning and got a call to go to certain coordinates and land, and I did the Loach, and I did. And then my roommate and another Cobra showed up, and a Huey showed up, and then they brought some fuel bladders and mechanics and everything. And we went. This was in 1969, first part of 69. We went 25 miles to Cambodia that night on a night mission, blacked out, getting radar vectors on where to turn target. And when we fired, the whole world lit up with tracers coming back at us. And we got so many secondary explosions from our rockets and we salvoed and went back. We did this for about 5 nights in a row. And we had really hit a big supply depot that they had in Cambodia on the Ho Chi Minh Trail coming down. But we were pretty far into Cambodia, but that was all stuff coming into the Delta. You know, they were bypassing North Vietnam and coming all the way to the Delta.
So this was stuff that they had brought down from North Vietnam all the way down along the trails.
Right,
all the way down
right.
to Fort Worth.
And there were tremendous secondary explosions. So there were probably artillery rounds, rockets, lots of rockets and that type stuff. But
Yeah, so there's the explosion of what your Cobra's sending in, and then it hits their stuff, and then that blows up. That's
yeah,
the
right. The South Vietnamese, there were some good soldiers there. Some I knew personally were really dedicated and really good. Some were not. Even the second tour I was there, I dealt with the Koreans quite a bit, who were there fighting on our side. The ROC, we call them Republic of Korea,
Right.
South Korean. These guys were fantastic soldiers, fantastic, better than any I've ever seen. Why were they so good and that dedicated? I don't know.
On this theme of reputations, the Rocks do have a reputation. I hear pretty much the same thing from every veteran who served with the Rocks about, perceptions of them. What was the reputation that the Rocks had?
They were just ruthless. Uh, if uh, if they went out and came back and said they had 7 kills, they had 7 right ears.
Yeah.
Right.
The
That type of thing. And they were the Vietnamese were scared of them. They wouldn't go around. We had a rock artillery battery near us, and somebody walked in and stole a sight off of a 105 howitzer, and they caught him doing it, and they hung him up in front of the base and wouldn't let anybody take him down. So they were just that tough,
Now, was this one of their own who stole something, or was it a Vietnamese who
No,
stole?
it was a VC actually who went by. They didn't have a very big perimeter set up because the Vietnamese wouldn't get near them. But this one somehow went in and stole that site. They found him with it. And
Wow. By hanging him up, you mean executing him?
how I don't want to sound too graphic or too gross, but they drove a rifle cleaning rod through his ears and hung him up by that.
Oh, wow.
I can remember Clint one day fired a 17-pound rocket and had a proximity fuse on, and it blew up right next to him in the aircraft. It blew the canopy off. It blew holes in the side. He lost total hydraulics on the Cobra, and his helmet was just blown off. It was barely hanging on his head. He didn't get a scratch. And he came in, and there's no way you can land or fly a Cobra without it. It had dual hydraulic systems. You could switch from one to the other. He had lost them all. You can't fly one without it. But he made a running landing on the airstrip, and we were all down there waiting because we knew it was going to be a big fiery crash when he hit. And he made a running landing, shuts the thing down, and got out. He looked at the plane, looked at the helicopter. He walked around it, looked at his helmet. And in a year in Vietnam and all our time in flight school, this guy never said a cuss word. But he looked at the plane. He said, "Well, son of a buck." And that's as close as he ever came to cussing.
When you look back on your 2 tours in Vietnam, let me pitch the question two different ways. What's the most important memory you have? Memory or maybe two, one or two. And here's a different way of framing the question. Suppose if, tomorrow, for some reason, all of your memories of your service in Vietnam were going to be taken away, but there were two that you could hold on to. What are those? What's that one or the two memories that are most important to you from your service in Vietnam?
It's not so important, but the most vivid memory I have is when that airplane rotated off the runway and broke ground, and the cheer that went up from all the guys that were on there. Everybody cheered at once and slapped each other on the back and laughed, and we were on our way back to the States. The other thing that I do remember is when I got shot. I was flying the front seat, and they had hit a convoy going from Tay Ninh to Dao Tiang. They blew up the lead vehicle, which they always did. It stopped the convoy, and then they attacked it from both sides. The Michelin rubber plantation was on each side of the road. The VC used that to their advantage because we had to pay Michelin for every tree we damaged, every rubber tree. It was like $500 a rubber tree. So they said, don't shoot out into the rubber plantation, which that was about, that was one of those dumb things politicians decided somewhere. And they hit the convoy, and as we were shooting at them, I couldn't see. I had my sun shield up on the sight, and when you fire the minigun, it's 4,000 rounds a minute. So the tracers look like just a laser beam almost. So you can actually look at the tracers and put it on target. So I couldn't see the tracers, so I put my sight down and leaned around. The sight as I was firing, the bullet went right through the sight. It hit me in the base of the neck and down my back. And the doctor, I didn't even see a doctor actually. It was a corpsman that got me at the hospital. He said it actually pushed your carotid to the side when it hit you. So you're a pretty lucky person. So I was lucky, but I was flying the next day after they stitched me up.
This was an enemy bullet that got you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Uh-huh. When we rolled in, they started shooting back at it. See, they hit every convoy, and we'd fly convoy escort during the day, and we would just wipe them out. And they said, finally, some genius said, we've got to take those Cobras out, or they're going to, kill us all. So they turned all their fire on the Cobra. And it was, I was just there by myself.
Wow.
Just the one Cobra.
And where did the bullet enter? Where did the bullet?
Right at the base of my neck, right here.
Did it exit?
It exited. It didn't exit. It was under the skin, right back here in my back. And I got out of the hospital, and I walked in there, and every table was taken in there by people with severe wounds. I mean, just deal. And they said, "What's your deal?" And I said, "I just got shot here." And I said, "I'm not hurting too bad. The glass out of the sight had cut my face up a little bit." And I said, "This isn't too bad. You got to take care of those guys." And I remember a big fat guy, red-headed guy with no shirt on, came over. He was a corpsman. He said, "Here's the bullet." He just took a scalpel and took it out and stitched them both up. And I walked out and went back to my unit.
That is unbelievable. And they told you that as the bullet went through, it actually just sort of pushed aside your carotid.
Yeah, he said it looks like it just pushed your carotid to the side when it went through.
Wow.
So I was lucky.
When you look back on that time in your life, 68, you're in there in May, 68, out in 69, back in 71. What does all that mean to you now? Maybe another way of, well, I guess a different but related question would be, how did the James Newman who left Vietnam for the second time, how is he different from the one who arrived in Vietnam in May of 68? What's the lifelong significance of that experience?
Well, I think uh, I was raised in a wonderful Christian home in the South. Uh, Wonderful parents. You know, I think what I did over there was not me. It was almost like a different person. Uh, I loved what I did there. Uh, I don't uh, talk about it a lot to people now, very often, but now I have a wonderful family, a wonderful wife. Uh, I live a blessed life, uh, and I think that's the big difference. My whole life was a little more in turmoil back then. I I, I really didn't care uh, about what happened to me, and I think there were a lot of guys in the same boat I was in. We didn't think about getting scared. I don't care. I never thought I was coming home from Vietnam until I got down to about 2 weeks left in country. And normally guys stop flying a month before their DERO date or something. They'd quit flying. Uh, Never more than 2 weeks. Clint and I were the only two Cobra aircraft commanders they had. So we flew basically every other mission right up to the day we left. And that that but when I got real short, I got down to a couple of weeks. I said, I might live through this. I might get home. But up until then, uh,
Wow.
I really didn't. I won't say I didn't care, but it was not. It, you know, I never thought about a life after the war.
And you did just kind of assume that you wouldn't make it?
Yeah, and the odds were the missions we flew, and as much as we flew at night, and the Cobras we had, and the number of pilots that we did lose, there's a good chance you wouldn't. You know.
Do you think in a way that was almost kind of liberating? You weren't paralyzed by the fear of not making it if you just kind of have the assumption.
I think it was yeah, it was a defense mechanism in a way, I guess. And the last two, when we got real short, we got hit by a mortar right in our room. It just blew the whole room up, and Clint and I just moved to the bunker, and we lived in the bunker the last 2 weeks down there with the roaches and rats. But that was better than getting killed your last couple of weeks in country. You make it that long, you think you're coming home. Yeah.
I don't know if you sometimes pilots have specific numbers, sometimes they know the numbers, but do you have a number or a good estimate of how many combat actions you were involved in?
Um, the way we flew and what we did, I was involved with combat every day.